Good evening. My name is Tim Andrews, and thank you for joining our live interactive telephone town hall. We are hosting tonight's event to give Congresswoman Spanberger the opportunity to hear directly from you and answer your questions about the issues facing Virginia's families, seniors, and the economy. Now, as I mentioned, this is an interactive forum. Congresswoman Spanberger will be taking as many questions as possible during this event. So if you're joining us live and you have a question, you can press *3 on your telephone keypad at any time, and you'll be placed in line to speak with a member of our staff. They'll take down your name, where you're calling from, and the next time you hear your name, you'll be live on the call and able to ask your question directly to the Congresswoman. You can also ask a question by submitting one through the portal and typing right below our online streaming player. You can find that at spanberger.house.gov/live. Again, that's spanberger.house.gov/live. Now, if you're watching on Facebook Live tonight, welcome. And if you wish to ask the Congresswoman a question, we encourage you to visit that online streaming portal to submit your question. Additionally, if you would like to receive updates from our office via email, simply press *6 on your keypad at any time. An operator will collect your email address. Again, that's *6. Now, we could receive a lot of questions during this event, so if we're unable to address your specific question, please call our district office at 703-987-2180 during normal business hours. Otherwise, if you have any questions during this event, simply press *3 on your keypad to ask it live, or just type your question right below the streaming player. Now, please welcome Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger. Congresswoman?
Thank you so much. I'm Abigail Spanberger, and I am so proud to represent Virginia's 7th District in the U.S. House of Representatives. And tonight I look forward to hearing directly from you about the issues that matter to you and your family, your businesses, and our communities. So thank you for taking the time to join us tonight. Thank you for sharing your views, and thank you for asking questions. We've had a busy few weeks on Capitol Hill and around the 7th District. And just yesterday, I brought the Small Business Administration, SBA, Administrator Guzman to Fredericksburg. During her visit, I wanted her to hear directly from members of our region's growing small business community. I wanted to make sure that she heard about the challenges facing businesses across the 7th District, particularly for entrepreneurs and those just starting out. We talked everything from supply chain challenges to inflation to workforce issues. And we also highlighted a lot of the successes that we have seen in Virginia's 7th District. I also want to take a moment to recognize the fentanyl crisis that continues to impact Virginia and the progress that we are making in Congress. As many of you on tonight's call might know, drug overdoses are now the leading cause of unnatural death in Virginia, and many of these deaths are directly related to fentanyl. Last week, I reintroduced my bipartisan CAST Act. This is a piece of legislation that would clearly define the criminal penalty for making counterfeit drugs, including illicit fentanyl or illicit drugs laced with fentanyl, using a pill press, by stiffening penalties for those who use and own pill presses and use them to distribute deadly drugs. We can reduce the number of overdoses that we're seeing on our streets. As a former federal law enforcement officer, I remain committed to ensuring that we're building a full front in the fight against fentanyl, whether through our law enforcement response, which continues to be extraordinary and challenging for our officers and our community members, to our treatment and our recovery efforts, supporting those who are committed to their own recovery. And finally, I wanted to make sure that you and your loved ones are aware of the fact that we have resources in our offices through constituent services and can be of help. If you or a neighbor or a friend or a loved one are in need of assistance from a federal agency, anything from the Social Security Administration to the IRS to the VA to SBA, please do not hesitate to be in touch with our office at 703-987-2180, or you can reach us online at spanberger.house.gov. We are more than happy to help, and we welcome you to be in touch. With that, I thank you for joining us this evening, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And again, for those of us that are joining us live. If you'd like to ask a question, this is an interactive forum, and we'd love to hear from you. So if you have a question, you'd like to ask it live, simply press *3 on your telephone keypad at any time. And you can also type it right below the streaming portal, and we'll read your question live and get the response from Congresswoman Spanberger. And with that, let's get right to our calls this evening. First off, we have Rory from Orange. Hi, Rory. You're live. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Congresswoman. It's been a while, and I appreciate the continued effort on behalf of your office and the ability to expedite getting things done for the community. I have two questions, or maybe you can aggregate it and comment accordingly. Number one, with the billions that are being spent on military equipment, armaments, which our own weaponry is down as far as munitions. But who is auditing where the monies go when we send armaments and funds to Ukraine? That's my number one question. And secondly, it's intriguing to me that the administration and people who have grown through the 70s and seen the Vietnam era and were clamoring for peace. I know there's always backdoor channels, but I don't really see an effort from people who used to be the dove-carrying peace people trying to negotiate anything here. I think Bill Burns, probably the CIA director, is the most avid in that, but it doesn't seem like he's able to do that. I'll stop at that point, and if you could comment, and we appreciate, again, the great effort that you're on behalf of the community.
Thank you so much, Rory. I appreciate it. And I am used to constituents with multi-part questions, so I have my notebook to write them down, so I make sure I touch on all of them. So to speak to the beginning portion of your question related to the money that we are spending in support of our Ukrainian allies. Those are funds that we are spending to allocate support, lethal, non-lethal aid, communications aid, medical aid. And then, of course, we are giving support through intelligence sharing and cooperation. I agree with you, Rory. We absolutely need oversight over those dollars, which is why I helped lead an effort that was signed into law last year to ensure significant oversight and clear accounting for the dollars that are going to support our Ukrainian allies. I wholeheartedly support the United States' role in supporting our Ukrainian allies by doing so by showing global leadership, bringing together our NATO allies and other partners in leveraging sanctions against Russia, in supporting our Ukrainian partners by ensuring that they have the supplies that they need, be it the HIMARS or the tanks. But we also need, as an issue of responsibility, to ensure that that money is going in the places that Congress intended. And so that oversight exists certainly in the committees, but also the accountability through legislation that passed at the end of the year is an important step to ensure that that accounting is occurring and that there can be no excuses for ensuring that our taxpayer dollars are accounted for and our financial support to Ukraine is accounted for. Now, Rory, to your second part about what's occurring, because there's not a lot of talk publicly, and I'll admit that fully, and not a lot of talk publicly about any efforts to try and end this war. And so I'll say two things. One, the United States stands ready, and this is something that our leadership, from the president to the Secretary of State and others throughout the diplomatic and intelligence and military communities, have said we stand ready to support our Ukrainian allies, and certainly when they are ready and to go to the negotiation table, that we are able to support them and we are willing to support them in whatever ways they need from us. The caveat or the challenge to that is, as long as Russian forces continue to commit atrocities on the ground in Ukraine, it is the position that our nation needs to ensure that it's the Ukrainians who are making the choice to go to that negotiating table. They are their soldiers who are dying and their civilians who are being abused and raped and murdered. And it's up to them to determine when they go to the negotiating table. That said, back channel communication is incredibly important to ensure that there's never any sort of unintentional escalation, particularly when we're already dealing with a country such as Russia that has shown such a willingness to inflict violence on a civilian population. And so I would point to, the example related to the shooting down of the drone, ensuring that any sort of action that could be perceived as escalatory directly between nations, directly between the United States and Russia, that there are back channel efforts, some open and some private, to ensure that while we are clear and focused in our support to our Ukrainian allies, that we are also protecting our own diplomatic and national security priorities by avoiding any inadvertent or any unintentional escalations between our country and frankly, any others. Certainly, I think that is an important part of U.S. policy and one that is not always directly in the forefront. But certainly from a national security perspective, an important element of our engagement, be it with the Ukrainians or any other nation.
Congresswoman, thank you, and I hope you're ready because we have a lot of calls coming in, a lot of questions. And again, if you're joining us live and you'd like to ask a question, simply press *3 on your telephone keypad, and that'll put you in line to get a question in to be answered by Congresswoman Spanberger. Up next, we have Don Wood. Hi, Don. Thank you for joining us tonight. What would you like to ask?
Yes, thank you. Don Wood, Occoquan, Virginia. Congratulations to the Congresswoman for winning an election to be our representative, and I'm so pleased for it. My question is, legislation that you introduced in the previous Congress to regulate insider trading by representatives, that was not successful in the previous Congress. What is your prognosis for this Congress in that legislation?
Don, thank you for this question. And just to add to it, not only was it not successful in the last Congress, but it wasn't successful in the Congress before that. I'm a little bit relentless on this issue. And for those who are joining and might not know what Don was mentioning, I lead a bipartisan effort to stop members of Congress, to make it illegal for members of Congress to buy or sell individual stocks. Far too often, we see reports in the news that a member of Congress bought this stock or sold this stock. And sometimes that correlates to when we had briefings about COVID or about Russia's intention to invade Ukraine. And I think that even the mere perception of impropriety in these actions degrades the trust that you all should have in your elected members of Congress. If you agree with me or disagree with me, that's your right, but you should never worry that I'm calling my stockbroker after a briefing. And so we introduced it in 2020. We being Chip Roy, he's a Republican from Texas. We are fierce advocates for this. We introduced it in 2020 in the 116th Congress. We couldn't get it to move forward. 117th Congress, we introduced it again, grew the co-sponsors, more Democrats, more Republicans, lots of people agreeing with us. We got a committee hearing, which was progress, but it was clear from that committee hearing that it was not going to move forward. For those who care about this piece of legislative policy, it was clear that the former speaker did not support the legislation, and so we knew that it likely would not move forward. It did not. Not to be deterred, Chip and I introduced it again, and we continue to grow our co-sponsors. It is, again, wholly bipartisan. People across the political spectrum, the geographic spectrum, the time in Congress spectrum, the wealth spectrum, all support this legislation. And here's the good news, and why I continue to maintain my optimism, is just 2 weeks ago, there was a member hearing day. And so the topic wasn't specifically this legislation, but it's something that the House Administration Committee does periodically, where they host these member days, which is where members of Congress can go testify before other members of Congress about policies and legislative priorities. And Chip and I testified together, and other members of Congress also testified to speak to why a ban on members of Congress buying or selling individual stocks is important. And here's the exciting part for me, Don. The chair of that committee, who's a Republican, and the ranking member, who's a Democrat, both asked really important questions, both spoke very favorably in their assessment of the principle of our legislation. And in answering those questions, my colleague Chip Roy and I were very clear in the fact that we wrote the legislation that we think is the best fix. We welcome amendments, we welcome changes, as long as the principles remain the same. Members of Congress can't buy or sell individual stocks, neither can their spouses, neither can their dependent children. And so I actually am hopeful that we could actually move it forward this year. Certainly last year, before he was Speaker, now Speaker Kevin McCarthy made some favorable comments about this legislation. And I'm going to choose to believe that those were earnest, and that now that he's actually Speaker and has the ability to bring them forward, that he may do so. So Chip and I continue to build up our co-sponsorship and continue to move this forward. So we've hit some hurdles in the past, but I am feeling far more optimistic at this point than I ever have. And I'm excited about it. It's not done yet, but it's March, and we have more co-sponsors than we have at any point in the time this year, or this early after introduction. And we've had some kind of favorable movement in committee. So looking forward to continuing to press on that. It's a pretty straightforward piece of legislation. I really believe in it. I think it's a basic ethics reform that the American people deserve, and I'll keep working for it. But I am pretty hopeful that we could move it forward this Congress. Far more hopeful than ever.
Don, thank you for calling in with that question. And again, for those of you joining online, simply type your question right below the streaming player, and we'll be able to see your question and ask that one of the Congresswoman, which we have one of those for you right now, Congresswoman Spanberger. This one comes from Christopher Graham. Christopher asks, what is the likelihood that the U.S. defaults, and has there been progress on talks?
Ooh, what is the likelihood that the U.S. defaults? And for those listening, I'm sure that many of you are aware that this summer is anticipated in being June. We will come up against the debt ceiling. And specifically what that means is that that's the point in time when the United States, we have legislatively previously capped the debt for the United States. And if at what point in time we hit that debt ceiling, if we do not raise it, we will default on the debts that we have. This endangers the economic stability of the United States. This is catastrophic from an economic standpoint and a national security standpoint. This would have major implications from everything from mortgage rates, which are already high, to the experiences of individuals or small business owners at the bank getting out loans. And it would be absolutely horrible for what it would mean to the U.S. economy and the probable government shutdown that would be part of that. I am absolutely clear that it is not even a possibility, and it cannot be a potential path forward for us to even risk a default. It is irresponsible, and it is detrimental. And so the question, though, because I don't make this decision on my own, the question is, what's the likelihood? If there was a bill that was brought forward tomorrow to raise the debt ceiling, it would pass. That's the reality. There are Democrats and Republicans who would vote to raise the ceiling to protect the U.S. economy. The challenge is that we need the Speaker of the House to choose to bring that forward. And unfortunately, some of his membership of the majority party do not want to vote to raise the debt ceiling. It is playing with fire, and it is dangerous. And particularly in Virginia's 7th District, and in Virginia as a whole, in a community where so much of our economy is influenced and impacted by spending of the federal government. So many of our constituents across the 7th and the larger Commonwealth are employed by the government, or engaged with some sort of commerce that also goes back to the government, the impact on our local economy would be even more catastrophic than the rest of the country. So what we are working on is trying to push to make sure that we bring forth a bill to raise the debt ceiling well before the June timeframe when we're expected to potentially reach that default. The global economy cannot afford to have this game of will they, won't they when it comes to us responsibly handling our debt. So the dollars we have already spent. And you may have heard that there's a lot of questions about, the types of negotiations that can happen. I am wholly on board if any colleague wants to have earnest conversations and debates about what we spend our money on in the future. That's our responsibility. That's how you govern. And that process happens when we're appropriating dollars. That process happens when we do all of our appropriations bills, which we are supposed to do this summer. So to hold the debt ceiling hostage, which is legislation related to money that we have already spent, much of it before I ever even got to Congress, the fact that we would kind of hold the full faith and credit of the United States hostage while also, discussing what we might do with our separate appropriations bills, I just don't think it is not an advisable thing. It is dangerous to the U.S. economy. And the reality is, getting back to the question, which is what's the likelihood of a potential default? It can't happen. And so I am choosing to believe and taking actions accordingly that ultimately responsible heads will win out the day, and that a bill to raise the debt ceiling will come forward. And then we'll have debates, as we should, over how we spend dollars through the appropriations bills. And in all of my conversations with my colleagues, that has been the position I've taken, and I have been encouraging my colleagues across the aisle to make clear to their leadership, again, the ones who have the ability to bring the bill to the floor, that is what must happen. And we're working hard. We're working hard behind the scenes, and we're working hard certainly to make sure that the American public understand what's at risk if we face a default, or even if we get too close to a potential default day.
On behalf of the Congresswoman, I'd like to thank the thousands that are joining us tonight for this live interactive town hall. We're going to take as many questions as we possibly can, and if you have a question that you would like to ask live, all you need to do is press *3 on your telephone keypad. That'll put you in line, and a member of our staff will speak with you, get your name, the area you're calling from, and the nature of your question, and we'll get to as many as we can before the end of this town hall this evening. And if you're joining us online, you can simply type your question right below the streaming portal, and we'll get to your questions as quick as we possibly can. Congresswoman, we have Tuck Rosenberry on the phone right now. Hi, Tuck. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Hello.
Hello.
My question
Hello?
for you is, have you read Sun Tzu, The Art of War? And do you understand that the Chinese have a strategic advantage on us? Over.
Tech, the short answer to your first question is yes, but it has been some time. And if you're still on the line, I welcome you to expound on your question. But if you're not, I'm happy to talk about the strategic advantage or the strategic challenges that the United States should be addressing. So let me get into those so that you know that as your representative, I'm focused on kind of some of the challenges that we face as it relates to China. And I think I know the strategic advantages of long-term planning and kind of 100-year at a time view of the world. So first off, there's the kind of geopolitical, regional, and economic strategies that the Chinese Communist government has been employing. And that means that they are making investments throughout other parts of the world. Kind of a well-known element of that is the Belt and Road Initiative, whereby the Chinese government is making major investments in infrastructure throughout Africa. They're doing the same throughout South America as well, and really positioning themselves as a necessary economic partner. And the reality is that when someone is on the ground as a necessary economic partner, positioning themselves as vitally important, that takes up space that could otherwise be filled by us or by other Western nations, some of our European allies. And so that long term planning and their engagement throughout entire continents create strategic challenges for the United States, and one that I think far too often goes unanswered. And certainly, I'm not saying that they can't make investments. That's their choice to make. But from the United States' perspective, we need to be clear and understanding that when they are routinely, time and time again, presenting themselves as a partner, presenting themselves as an economic investor, particularly in economically challenged countries, that is space that we are ceding. And in the discussion of U.S. global leadership or economic leadership on the world stage, every time we cede ground, someone else is going to try and take it up. And so, to your point, Tuck, I think from one of the strategic elements, that's a challenge. Another element of the challenge that we face as it relates to China is an immediate threat, and that is the theft of intellectual property and the theft of data. And that comes as a threat to the American population, our businesses, because there are simply just different rules related to privacy and related to data management and different expectations that exist in a government ruled by the Chinese Communist Party. And so what we must do, and what we're certainly working to do on Capitol Hill, is to make sure that we are legislating in a way that protects the American people from that theft of data, that we are also making clear the risks that exist. A lot of elected officials talk about TikTok and the challenges of TikTok. And it's because a company like TikTok that is directly linked back to the Chinese government poses a great risk for data for the American people. And so making sure that people across our country know the risks that they take when they might download a seemingly innocuous or fun app, that's a real challenge. And kind of when all that information is able to be taken or trolled or mined kind of in the aggregate, that creates a long-term challenge for the United States. And those are kind of two elements to get to your discussion of the overall strategy that we see from the Chinese government, and what we need to be doing, and what indeed many of us are doing on Capitol Hill through legislation, is making sure that when we're having the conversations about U.S. global engagement, be it the encouragement of U.S. companies to invest overseas or in our own hemisphere in South America, that we are recognizing that part of the reason that we do that is because when there is a U.S. presence and when we are the economic partner of first choice, someone else isn't. We also need to recognize through the choices that we're making related to our aid and our diplomacy and our intelligence sharing that this is the way that we acknowledge and in some cases counter the strategy that's being put forth by the Chinese Communist Party. And really recognizing that the choices that we make now and the decisions to invest elsewhere and the decisions to engage elsewhere need to be part of our long-term strategy that is just as long-term as what we know to be the choices made by the Chinese government. And certainly as we think about the partnership that we have had with our Ukrainian allies and in support of their defense of their own democracy, a clear element of that as well is making sure that countries that want to be democracies, that want to be able to defend themselves, know that they need to and can and should pivot towards the United States as a global leader, willing to support and help those that are engaged and working towards their own democracy. And then one other piece, Tuck, and I could probably talk about this for the next hour, that I would mention is the CHIPS and Science Act, which is a piece of legislation that we passed in the House with bipartisan support, passed in the Senate, got it to the president's desk, and it's now in implementation stages, is an answer to the fact that over years, our semiconductor industry has left the United States and either going to China or going to Taiwan, where it, is very much outside of our direct supply chain. And so this bill, the Chips and Science Act, will bring home and is intended to bring home not just semiconductor production here, manufacturing jobs here in the United States, but also securing the supply chain that we need. That's one piece of it. I have another piece of legislation, supply chain related, and particularly given some of the challenges we face with China related to prescription drugs. And so I hear you, Tech. I know exactly what you're talking about. And one last thing, I said I was done, but one last thing, because you got me going on the issues with the challenge related to the Chinese Communist Party. Congress this year, and I voted to create this committee. There's a committee on competition with China, and it's a standalone select committee. A lot of great people serving on that committee that are really focused on recognizing some of the long-term strategic challenges that the United States will face because of a country in the world that plans like China does, and making sure that we're making important long-term choices in U.S. national security and U.S. economic interests. And with that, I'll end. But next time I see you, we'll have to have a longer conversation. Thank you so much for that question.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you, Tuck, for that question, and for all of you that are calling in with questions this evening. And if you're live, simply hit *3 on your telephone keypad. That'll get you in line to speak with a Congresswoman. If you're joining us on Facebook Live tonight, thank you for joining us. All you need to do if you'd like to submit a question to be asked for the Congresswoman is just go to spanberger.house.gov/live, and then just type in your question right below the streaming player. We'll get to as many as we can this evening. Up next from Madison, we have Dan Douglas on the line. Hi, Dan. Thank you for holding and your patience. You're live with the Congresswoman.
Thank you very much. And Congressman, congratulations on your recent election. We voted for you here. I'm a retired government employee, and over the years, as all government employees, all federal government employees have done, we've paid into two retirement systems, both the Social Security system and a regular federal retirement. Most of that time I spent overseas, wasn't aware of what was going on, but sometime back in the Nixon administration, a new law was passed that people in my situation and all of the government employees in that respect were not really engaged in what was happening because we didn't have internet, we didn't have newspapers in a lot of places. Lo and behold, I come back to the States. I worked a few years still with the government. And then I found out that my two retirements were really not what they were supposed to be. The federal retirement that I paid like 15% into was fine, but what happened with the Social Security was that administration back during the Nixon administration determined that that was too much money for people to get. Even though we were paying a full share into both systems, once I went to Social Security at the age of 65, I was told, well, you're not going to get what the booklet has been telling you that we send out every year. And I wound up with less than half of it. In fact, about $300 a month for Social Security. Why? Well, the reason I was told that we were making too much money under our other retirement. Not fair to us, certainly not fair to any of the states who have glommed onto that and doing the same thing. So my question is, you've been doing some work, I understand, to own the retirement systems. Has anything been approached about that at all?
So I want to just make sure, Dan, I assume you're talking about the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset, the GPO.
Yeah, I think that's what it was called.
Yes. So actually, the answer to your question is yes, something's been done about it. And I am actually leading those efforts with Garrett Graves from Louisiana. I was leading it in the past with Rodney Davis, who is a Republican from Illinois. He just retired from Congress. Garrett Graves took it over. We have a bill called the Social Security Fairness Act because for those who are unfamiliar with what Dan was talking about, there was a law put in place. And Dan, thank you for your service to our country. And particularly if you were serving overseas all those years, thank you for your service. And I imagine what at times were harsh and interesting conditions. But there was a law put in place that recognized or that put forth this premise that depending upon someone's financial circumstances, depending upon the type of retirement plan they had through their federal service, that their Social Security would be arbitrarily reduced. And this is, well, I guess by law, so not arbitrarily, but certainly unfairly. And what this law does is it negatively impacts certainly federal retirees, a lot of police officers, a lot of firefighters, a lot of teachers, public sector employees who are expecting and planning for the Social Security numbers that, again, they have paid into the system and they expect to receive in their retirement. And so, what we have in our legislation is a very clear clarification, removing the government pension offset, which is what it is that that Dan's talking about, but also what's called the windfall elimination provision, which is a really terrible provision that predominantly negatively impacts widows and widowers as when they lose a federal or other employee retiree spouse. We introduced it, I guess, just 2 weeks ago. Again, each Congress, we reintroduce it, keep this pressure up. We already have, we just hit more than 200 co-sponsors. And, you know, these are things that many of you may not track in the day to day, but to get 200 co-sponsors means a bill is very popular within just a few months. Our goal is to exceed 290 co-sponsors. And last Congress, we did it. But we hit that goal a little too late. And let me tell you what that means. So 290 co-sponsors is the number that you need to force a bill to the floor. 218 under normal circumstances passes the bill. 290 says, look, everybody supports this. 290 people are willing to not just vote for it, but put their name to it. And so let's get it to the committee and then the floor. Last year, it took us about a year and a half, a little over a year and a half to get to that 290 number. And then that was not enough of a bridge to get it to the floor. There was some games and a little bit of stalling, if you're asking me. But this year, Garrett and I said that is not going to occur. This is absolutely negatively impacting so many retired public servants. And we need to eliminate these two provisions. So now it's, the new Congress, we were just sworn in January. And within 2 months, we have just cleared 200 co-sponsors. So our expectation is to force a vote on this. And we're already starting the discussions with our counterparts on the Senate, because once we force a vote, although hopefully, perhaps we can actually just have them bring it up because it's the right thing to do. But once we get a vote on this bill, we need our Senate partners to be ready to vote on it so we can send it to the president's desk. But Dan, I'll make sure that my team has your contact information, and I'll send you a little bit more information about this legislation. I actually just did a long 30, 40-minute interview with the National Fraternal Order of Police. So they pushed it out on their website. It's on their podcast about this issue to inform the public, to inform people, because so many retired police officers, as well as teachers, firefighters, public servants, and retired federal employees are impacted. And the bill is called the Social Security Fairness Act, and it is as straightforward as its name implies. So thank you for asking this question, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. And certainly, we're always collecting stories about people who have been impacted for me to mention as we continue our advocacy. So I'd love to follow up and get a few more details from you, Dan, if you're willing for me talk about your story. Thank you.
And for those of you joining us, the thousands that are joining us tonight, if you'd like to receive regular email updates from the Congresswoman's office, simply press *6 on your telephone. A member of our staff will collect your email, and that way you can stay in the loop on everything that's going on and be up to date. And if you'd like to ask a question live tonight, of course, simply press *3 on your telephone keypad, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Right now, Congresswoman, we have Hectoria Johnson. She's calling from Spotsylvania, and it's so good to have you, Hectoria. Thank you for holding for the Congresswoman. You're live right now.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking my call, Congresswoman.
Hello.
I am one of your biggest supporters. Hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for taking my call, Congresswoman. I am one of your biggest supporters, and congratulations on your recent election. We are so thankful. And I have two questions, actually, and one of them is concerning the inflation.
Yeah.
What we're going through, as families. We know, I believe it is, tapering down the inflation, but it is still, for, day-to-day Americans, it is still high. My husband and I, we make a decent, amount every year, but with kids and, everything else, it's like we're trying to stay afloat, and it's everyday prices are going up. Everyday things are costing more, and we're trying to adjust so that, we don't suffer. And so my question is, what is being done, as far as the inflation, to help families? And my second question is concerning the healthcare in the nation. And as you all are aware, well, you might be aware, not many people, there's a shortage of nurses,
Yes.
not only in Virginia, but in the United States. What is being done to help with that? And also for students that are in school, what is being done to help them get through school successfully, as many students, get through their school successfully? Because I believe that one of the problems is that professors are not being paid well enough. So there's a waiting list of students that want to enter nursing school, but there's no space. So what is being done to also help with that situation?
Victoria, those are two really important questions. Certainly, while inflation and the impacts of inflation, gas prices are coming down, the reality is that it's still impacting people. I was in the grocery store with my youngest daughter the other day, and just some of the minor supplies that we were buying, bag of onions and some juice, is still so much more expensive than I know it was a year and a half ago. And so in terms of what we are doing to address inflation, I'll say two things. One, what I am working on specifically is ensuring that we are putting forth legislation that will have a longer term impact on some of the reasons and causes for inflation. And at times of high inflation, be it the increased price of gas or the increased price of prescription drugs and food, the impact felt by families is significant. So we have worked, and were successful at the end of last year and in the last Congress to make some important moves forward in lowering the cost of prescription drugs, capping the price of insulin for those on Medicare. And importantly, we have seen some private companies follow suit and cap the price of insulin for the individuals who they insure. We also put forth legislation. It was signed into law that would ensure that Medicare can negotiate the cost of some of the most expensive drugs, which is important because that puts downward pressure on prices. The fact that Medicare cannot negotiate, it legally is prohibited from doing so, is outrageous and anti-competitive and anti-capitalist. And so we've removed that prohibition for some drugs. It was what we could get through, what we could get signed into law. And I intend to continue advocating for that legislation to be expanded again to cover all drugs because it's important in the larger marketplace. I've also done a lot of work related to some of the anti-competitive behavior and monopolistic behavior that exists in meat packing and meat processing. While this is not what caused inflation, certainly having anti-competitive behaviors within the marketplace and vertical integration and for meat processing does have an impact. Certainly, while the American people were feeling inflation at the grocery store when we go to buy, hamburger patties or we go to buy chicken or whatever it is that someone wants to purchase, but then we see that the big four meat processors are making record profit while farmers across Virginia and the rest of the country continue to see their share of the profit go down. Something's wrong with that system. So I put forth legislation to not only combat those anti-competitive behaviors, but also to help start up and fund smaller meat processing facilities, and particularly in a place like Virginia, where we have so many small family farms and livestock producers, being able to get that meat processed locally and then to the stores really cuts down on all the overhead costs. It benefits the farmer and ultimately can have a positive impact in the grocery store. Now, these are all longer term ways to address the problem, and they are the piece of legislation I continue to work on. Some of the things that could have value in the immediacy, we're really trying to make sure that the current majority party will even bring any of these bills forward for a vote. Unfortunately, there hasn't been much of an inclination from the current majority party, of which I am not a part, to bring those bills forward for a vote. And so that's why I'm doing a lot of work in this longer term planning space, trying to build up bipartisan support, at least for those bills, so that ideally we could get them to the floor. Now, your second question related to a nursing shortage is an incredibly important one. And there's two things that I'm focused on here. One is immigration reform. The United States and many hospital systems rely on, and historically have relied on, incredibly skilled, high skilled nurses, RNs, and doctors who have trained in other countries, but want to come to the United States to bring their skills and their passion and their knowledge to serve our patient population. And unfortunately, we continue to face challenges with the need for immigration reform and some hurdles within the Department of State processing visas. So we have been in touch with some of the hospital systems and employers across Virginia that continue to try and sponsor particularly nurses to come to the United States and work. Fully trained, highly skilled, and incredibly important to the workforce. So that's one element. And then, of course, there are many people, many Americans who want to go into the field of nursing or who don't know they want to go into the field of nursing, but would be extraordinary healthcare providers if they knew it was an option. And so this is a place where I've also been involved, heavily involved locally with the community colleges and with the local universities in the 7th District and then across the greater Commonwealth. Notably, I've seen a lot of really inventive programs where our community colleges are recognizing sometimes the unique needs of students, unique needs such as daycare for their children, unique needs such as starting the program but maybe taking some time away and coming back to it, unique needs such as they may want to ultimately be a registered nurse, but they need to be working now. And so they might want to start to determine if they enjoy the profession, starting with CNA or, and then moving on to an LPN program and then moving on to an RN program. And so we are seeing really inventive and creative programs where our community college systems are being highly responsive to the needs of their students and also the needs of the community. I was very, very proud to work to help get a grant for support to a health unit in one of our counties to ensure that they can do training on the ground for healthcare providers going through their programs. So there's a lot of exciting work being done, a lot more that needs to be done, and I've been very proud through my support to try and secure federal grant funding across the 7th District. I've been proud to provide some of that support. But thank you for raising this incredibly important issue. And thank you for giving me the chance to speak on some of the things that I'm doing to address it.
If you'd like to ask a question of the Congresswoman this evening, there's a couple ways you can do that. If you're joining us live, simply press *3 on your telephone keypad. That'll put you in line to speak with the Congresswoman. A member of our staff will get your information, and we'll get to you as soon as we can. And if you're joining us live online at spanberger.house.gov/live, simply type your question right below the streaming player. And if you're joining us on Facebook Live, again, we encourage you to go to that website, spanberger.house.gov/live. That's /live. And you can type your question in as well, and we'll get as many as we can in during this interactive town hall this evening. Congresswoman, our next call this evening comes from Stafford. Barry's on the line. Hi, Barry. Thank you for calling, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you. At least I forget. Thank you, Congresswoman, for representing the 7th District. My question goes to COVID-19 Origin Act. I know that's been passed in the Senate and the House. I saw that on March 10th, there was a motion to reconsider. And I wanted to know from you where that really stood and when you thought it might reach the president's desk.
So thank you for bringing this bill up, Barry. This is a good bill that as soon as I was done answering Tuck's question a bit ago, I realized I didn't mention, so I'm glad you asked about it. So there's a bill that was put forth. It came before the Intelligence Committee, and I sit on the Intelligence Committee through the markup process that would require the United States' intelligence agencies to release whatever information they are able to release and still protect sources and methods publicly about the potential origins or what we know about the origins of COVID-19. That bill did pass through the House of Representatives with bipartisan support. And I did vote for that bill. I think transparency is important. The bill did have provisions in it that would, clearly defined that sources and methods should be protected. But the bill made clear that it's important that the American public have information about potentially how the pandemic began. Certainly in the early days of 2020, there was so much that we didn't know. Unfortunately, we knew that we were not always getting good, clear information from the Chinese government. Certainly, we know that they do not provide correct information about their GDP. It should be expected that they were not going to provide the most transparent or truthful information related to a potential, at that time, beginning of a pandemic. We voted for it. I supported it. I voted for it in committee and also on the floor of the House. But I'll have to reach out to my counterparts over at the White House to determine what the timing might be, and on the Senate side, what the timing might be for that legislation. So we can follow up with you directly, Barry. And to anybody else who's curious about this one, we can put that information out on social media and out in our newsletter to get final information about what the expectations are for that bill moving forward. It's a pretty straightforward bill. It certainly garnered a little bit of partisanship because there's frankly been a little bit too much partisanship in the discussion related to the origin of COVID. But the reason that I voted for this bill is because it did make clear that the American people should know, what it is that our intelligence community knows, and put that information out there responsibly. And I think that that's actually quite important, particularly because with the lack of information, we've seen people kind of jump to conclusions or assert what they believe. But indeed, the more information that is facts-based and well-sourced being put out in the public sphere, I think is valuable. And also it is helpful. Certainly I don't ever want to see a pandemic like we saw with COVID-19, but the more information that kind of people know about the origins, how it started and how it spread, will ideally allow us to be able to protect ourselves in the future and communicate clearly with our fellow Americans if and when we're ever in a position of being at risk to that extent again. But we'll follow up with the kind of specifics of that path, Barry. Thank you.
Our next question, Congresswoman, comes from Woodbridge. Kathy Cuevas. I hope I got that last name right, Kathy. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Congressman.
Hello.
I would like to ask about what's being done to make colleges more affordable. Like, could you work on something that could make community colleges free for in-state students, and also maybe add more highly skilled job training opportunities, like vocational workers for those who do not want to go to college to get a degree.
That's right.
That's it. Mm-hmm.
So, Kathy, thank you for this question, and I'd like to touch on a couple different things. Because college is a great choice for many people. College is also not necessary or not the chosen path for many people. And we have really valuable, important jobs in our communities that pay a family-sustaining, family-supporting wage, that are highly skilled jobs, but don't require a bachelor's degree from a university. And the way that many in our communities are attaining those jobs is through apprenticeship programs. Certainly many of the labor unions across Virginia have extraordinary apprenticeship programs where you get paid while you're learning. You do on-the-job work and then ultimately proceed through that program and graduate out of a program with a job. And with an incredible skill set that will kind of carry you for the rest of your professional career. We also have fantastic certification programs. Some of them run independently, and some of them run by community colleges throughout the 7th District and the larger Commonwealth of Virginia. And I have had the opportunity to visit so many of them. And it's really important, the work that they're doing, the training that they're doing, either towards certification programs that at times can be stackable, so someone can go through and get multiple different types of certifications to bring out into the workforce, and then get placed with an employer where they can practice those skills and continue an apprenticeship. And then I would just want to highlight two pieces of legislation that I have worked on. Notably, one is called the Freedom to Invest Act, and that's a piece of legislation that is bipartisan. I introduced it with Rob Whitman, and it for those of you, some of you in the 7th District, he used to be your representative before redistricting. And that's a piece of legislation for those who are able to save and want to save for their own or a child's education through a 529 program. Being able to utilize that 529 program for a certification program is a flexibility that I think should be inherent and part of this program. And right now there's pretty significant limitations on the type of training and the type of and the ways that one can spend those dollars. But ensuring that anyone who chooses to save through a 529 program can utilize that money in a way that either creates a path towards their career or gives them the additive certifications that they need. That's important flexibility. So Congressman Whitman and I continue to work on that. Just reintroduced it again. And then separately, for those who are more challenged and aren't necessarily able to utilize a 529 to save for school, ensuring that Pell Grants can be far more flexible. Those who are eligible are able to use those dollars, not just for kind of a traditional degree, but also for the programs and the certifications that will get them a job that matters to the community and certainly is one that they will enjoy and excel at. So those are some of the things that I've been working on to make sure that the path that a student takes or a young adult takes or even a career changer takes is supported and ultimately affordable. I also just introduced, for those who do choose college, a bipartisan bill focused on transparency in pricing and in loans. So much of the, so many of the challenges that college students face is a total lack of transparency in terms of what it is that they owe, when they owe it, and what the long-term impact of any loans that they choose to take out may be. And so increased transparency and kind of ensured a focus on the needs of the student is something that that I've worked on there as well. Just introduce that legislation again. So thank you for that question, Kathy. I very much appreciate it.
Congresswoman, I don't know if you'll believe this, but with so many great questions, we've already come to the end of our town hall this evening. So I just want to go back to you and see if you have any closing remarks you'd like to share with constituents before we wrap up this evening's live town hall.
Well, thanks so much for moderating. Great job as usual. And to all of the constituents who listened, thank you for joining. Thank you for listening in. Thank you for asking questions. I know there are many people that we did not get to, but I hope that we have collected your information. We can follow up with an answer. Also want to make sure that everyone knows that we have a newsletter that's informative. We send it out at the end of every week, highlighting what's been happening across the 7th District, what I've been working on Capitol Hill, and provide valuable information. I hope that you'll sign up for that. And I also wanted to remind if you or a loved one or a neighbor need any help with a federal agency, you need your passport, or you're having trouble with your mail, or trouble with VA benefits, IRS, Medicare, et cetera, please contact our office. We will try to be helpful. And we will try to get you answers. That is part of our job. We're proud to do it. And I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to serve you all. Thanks for joining. I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening and a wonderful Friday and a fantastic weekend. Again, thank you for joining.